The coat room at the Crestmont smelled like wet wool and lilies, and I stood in it with my phone in my hand while 40 feet away, 80 people ate the salmon I had chosen. Curtis had told me to leave his birthday party. Not once. Twice. The second time he'd said it with his hand on my elbow, steering, the way you'd move a chair that was in the wrong spot. He thought I was crying in there. I wasn't. I was logged into the vendor portal for the Rideau room, and my thumb was hovering over a button that said cancel remaining services, and my heart was going slow and even, like it does at work when a supplier's numbers don't add up, and I've finally found the row where the lie begins. He didn't know I'd seen the hotel receipt from Le Rivage. He didn't know about the account at a bank he thought I'd never check, or the 9 transfers out of our renovation money, or the text where he called me a situation he'd handle after the party. He knew none of it. He just knew I was killing his night. So I did. My name is Tessa. I'm 38. I've lived in Ottawa my whole life except for 2 years in Sudbury I don't talk about, and I work as a procurement analyst for a hospital network. That means I spend my days reading invoices. Thousands of them. Catheters, gauze, contrast dye, service contracts for the CT scanners. My job is to notice when a number stops making sense. When a supplier bills for 11 cases of something and the loading dock logged 9. When a maintenance contract renews at a rate nobody approved. I am very, very good at my job. Curtis used to tell people that at parties, in the early years, with his hand warm on the back of my neck, she finds the money. Like it was a party trick. We met when I was 25. He was doing a bathroom for a woman I worked with, and he showed up at her housewarming in a clean shirt with drywall dust still in the creases of his knuckles. He was funny in a way that made everyone in a room aim themselves at him. 12 years married. No kids, not for lack of trying, and then after a while for lack of talking about it. When my father died in 2016, he left me $62,000 and a set of socket wrenches. I gave Curtis 55 of the 62. That was the seed of Bellamy Ridge Contracting Limited. I did the books for the first 4 years, invoicing, payroll remittances, HST filings, the whole grinding business of it, at the kitchen table, after my actual job. When Bellamy Ridge finally got big enough to hire a proper bookkeeper, Curtis took me out for dinner and toasted me, and I remember thinking that I had never in my life felt more like a partner in something. His mother co-signed the company's line of credit in 2018. Harriet Bellamy. She holds 20% of the shares. Curtis's idea, back when he was superstitious about luck and thought a mother's name on a document was a kind of blessing. She's 76, she still drives, she taught grade 5 for 31 years, and she does not suffer nonsense from anyone, including her son. Especially her son. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I was not a woman with a bad marriage. I was a woman with a marriage I thought was fine. Curtis got quieter in the last 2 years, and worked later, and put a passcode on his phone that he'd never had before, and I told myself that a man in his 40s running a business in a bad year is entitled to be tired. I really did tell myself that. I want you to know I wasn't clever. I was just eventually paying attention. He turned 45 in February. He'd been strange about it since Christmas. He'd say things like, "Don't make a thing of it," and then leave the room in a way that meant make a thing of it. My best friend, Priya, said men his age want a party the way a cat wants to be let out. They'll stand at the door and complain the whole time you're opening it. So I made a thing of it. I booked the Rideau room at the Crestmont, which is a boutique hotel on the edge of Centertown, with brass fixtures, and a wall of windows that look at nothing in particular, but look at it beautifully. 80 people. A Saturday in late February, the ugliest month Ottawa has, when everybody is desperate for a reason to put on real shoes. I want you to understand the shape of what I did, because the shape matters. I signed the venue contract. $5,800 deposit, my visa, the one in my name from before we married. I hired sumac and salt to cater, Arctic char, short rib, a vegetarian thing with squash that Priya still talks about, and I paid the 50% deposit, $6,200, and the balance was due on the Monday after. Bar service through a company called Copperline, $2,100, pre-authorized on my card with an open tab up to a ceiling of $4,000. Flowers from a shop on Bank Street, $1,150. A photographer named Rowan, $1,400. A DJ, $900. A late-night station with poutine and pierogies, because Curtis is from Vanier and sentimental about it, $600. A block of 8 hotel rooms upstairs for out-of-toners, held on my card. A suite for Curtis and me on the top floor for the night, because I thought it would be romantic, and because I thought a man should not have to drive home from his own birthday. Brunch the next morning in the hotel's back room for family. $2,000 more. I was the signatory on every single contract. My name, my email, my phone number, my card. Not because I'm controlling, because Curtis doesn't answer emails. Because if you'd asked him what a room rental writer was, he would have made a joke and gone back to his phone. Every vendor in that building had me in their contacts as the point of contact. Everyone. Here is how it started to come apart, and it started so stupidly. 3 weeks before the party, I was collecting dry cleaning. Curtis's charcoal blazer had a stain on the cuff, and I went through the pockets the way you do, and there was a receipt folded into a square the size of a stamp. Le Rivage in Gatineau. One night, a Thursday in November, $268 and change. Room service, a bottle of wine, 2 glasses. That Thursday in November, Curtis had been in Kingston looking at a warehouse conversion. He'd texted me a photo of his motel breakfast, 2 little tubs of jam. I stood in our front hall in my coat, boots dripping on the mat, and I read the receipt about 9 times, and here's the thing I keep coming back to. I did not cry. I did not call him. I did not go running through the house pulling out drawers. I thought, 2 glasses. And then I thought about my Aunt Colette, my mother's sister who lived in Kingston and never married, and who told me at my own wedding reception, in a voice like a hand on the back of my neck, keep one account. Nobody knows the balance of but you. Not because he's a liar, because you should never have to ask anyone's permission to leave a room. I hadn't done it. Not exactly. But I'd never closed the visa from before, and I'd kept my own Cheekwing account. And it turns out that's a kind of door. I put the receipt back in the pocket. I hung the blazer up. I took a photo of it first. That night I made chili, and Curtis came home and kissed the top of my head and asked if we still had the garment bag from his cousin's wedding, and I said it was in the front closet. And he said something about the cufflinks his dad had left him, and I watched his face while he talked. It was such an ordinary face, 12 years of it. He had a fleck of chili on his lip, and I reached over and got it with my thumb, and he grinned at me. I have thought about that grin more than any other thing in this story. Over the next 4 days, I stopped being a wife and became what I am at work. Our renovation fund was a separate account, drawn from a home equity line of credit we'd taken out in 2023 to redo the kitchen and finish the basement. $90,000 approved, about $41,000 used. The rest was sitting there, and I hadn't looked at it since the fall because the kitchen was done and the basement was waiting for spring. I sat down at the dining room table on a Tuesday with a cup of tea going cold, and I pulled the statements back to the previous June. 9 transfers out. Not big ones. Nothing that would trip a bank's fraud alert or a wife's casual eye. $1,200 in June, $800 in July, $2,000 in August in 2 pieces a week apart, $1,500 in September, $900 then $1,100 in October, $1,600 in November, the same week as Le Rivage, $2,600 in December, which was the month he told me we should keep Christmas small because the business was slow. $11,700. All of it moved by e-transfer or internal transfer to an account I didn't recognize, listed in the memo field as Ridge Ops. Bellamy Ridge does not have an operations account. Bellamy Ridge has one business checking account at the same bank, and I know its last 4 digits the way I know my own birthday because I typed them into remittance forms for 4 years. I sat there in the dark kitchen with the fridge humming, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. Not heartbreak. Not yet. Heartbreak came later in a parking garage, and it was ugly, and it took about 11 minutes, and then it was done. What I felt at that table was recognition. The feeling of finding the row where the lie begins. The second account announced itself, because he was careless the way people are when they've gotten away with something for a while. An envelope came to the house, not addressed to Bellamy Ridge, addressed to Curtis Bellamy, personal, from an online bank we don't use. It sat in the pile by the door for 2 days because he'd been out at a job in Barhaven, and on the 3rd day I opened it, and I want to say I hesitated, but I didn't. Checking account. Opened the previous May. Balance. 400 and change, because money went in and money went out and it never stayed. Money in, transfers from the renovation fund. Money in, 3 deposits from Bellamy Ridge Contracting Limited, business checkwing labeled subcontractor. Money out, a jewelry shop in the Byward Market, a boutique on Sussex, a spa in Chelsea, Quebec. Le Rivage, twice more, August and January. A flight to Halifax in October for 2, which was interesting, because Curtis had told me he was in Halifax for a supplier conference and had come home complaining about how boring it was. And a recurring monthly payment of $1,800 to a property management company in Hintonburg. He was paying somebody's rent. I want to describe the specific sensation because nobody ever does. It isn't rage. Rage is loud and it wants an audience. This was more like being handed a photograph of your own house from an angle you've never seen it from, and realizing there's a door on the side that you've never opened, and that other people have been going in and out of it for a year while you slept. I called in sick to work on the Thursday. Not because I couldn't function, because I needed 8 uninterrupted hours. Bellamy Ridge uses a cloud accounting system. I set it up. My login still existed, because when the bookkeeper came on, nobody thought to remove the person who'd built the chart of accounts. And Curtis certainly didn't, because he doesn't know what a chart of accounts is. 3 deposits from the company to his private account, coded to subcontractor expense, backed by invoices from a vendor called YS Design Consulting. YS Design Consulting had invoiced Bellamy Ridge Contracting 11 times in 14 months. Staging consultation, interior specification, color and materials advisory. Total, $41,300. 4 of those invoices were for jobs I could match to real properties. 7 were for jobs that didn't exist or existed as commercial builds. A dental clinic in Canada, a warehouse mezzanine, a fire-damaged triplex nobody was staging for anybody. You do not hire a color and materials advisor for a fire-damaged triplex. You hire a guy named Dave with a claw hammer. Of that $41,000, a hair over $22,000 had been paid out, and then within days moved back into Curtis's private account. The rest had stayed with YS Design. I found her in 6 minutes on a professional networking site because she'd tagged Bellamy Ridge in a post about a kitchen. Yvette Sorensen, 28, design and staging consultant. A photo of her on a job site in a hard hat that had clearly never been within 100 meters of falling debris. $22,000 of his own company's money, laundered through a fake consultancy, back into a private account to pay for a woman's rent and her jewelry and her weekends across the river. His mother co-signed that line of credit. Harriet's name was on the guarantee. If Bellamy Ridge went under, The bank was coming for a 76-year-old retired teacher's condo on Riverside. That's the part that finally made me put my head down on the kitchen table. The last thing I found by accident, and it was the only piece I got the way people always assume you get these things. A phone face-up on the counter, lighting up while he was in the shower. It wasn't a love note. It was worse because it was logistics. She'd asked whether she was still coming Saturday. He'd said yes, come at 8. After the dinner, nobody will clock it. She'd said something about being nervous, and he'd written back, "Relax. After the party, I deal with the Tessa situation. One thing at a time. The Tessa situation." Lowercase t, he didn't even capitalize me. I put the phone back exactly where it had been, at exactly the angle it had been, and I went and stood in the front hall and looked out the window at the snowbank at the end of our driveway, which had gone that gray color they go in February. And Curtis came out with a towel around his waist and asked if I'd seen his good watch, and I said, "Try the dish in the den," and he said, "Thanks, babe." 11 days. That's how long it was from the receipt in the blazer pocket to the coat room at the Crestmont. 11 days. Priya asked me later why I didn't confront him, why I didn't throw the statements on the table and scream. And I've thought about that, and here's the honest answer. Because a confrontation is a conversation, and a conversation is a negotiation, and I did not want to negotiate. I wanted to be finished. Also, and this is less noble, I wanted him to have the party. I wanted him to be standing in a room he thought was his, in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress, when the floor came up. On the Monday of that week, I emailed a family lawyer named Ilse Dubinsky, whose name I'd gotten from a woman at work who'd gone through something in 2019. We met Wednesday in an office on Metcalf with a radiator that clanked. Ilse is about 60, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she read for 11 minutes without saying anything. Then she took her glasses off. "Ontario," she said. "The house is the matrimonial home. Doesn't matter whose name is on title, it gets split, full stop. Everything else, we do equalization, his net worth on the date you separate minus what he brought in. Same for you. And whoever's ahead pays half the difference. He's ahead. On paper." She tapped the invoices. "This isn't just an affair, Tessa. Depleting family property to fund a relationship. A court can and does adjust for that. And this," she moved the YS design pages an inch, "is not a family law problem. This is his company's money, and his mother is a shareholder and a guarantor, and this is fraud against his own company, against a corporation, which is a separate person, whose other shareholder is his mother. And the CRAs will find the expense deductions interesting." She put her glasses back on. "Whether that becomes a criminal matter depends on things neither of us controls. But he does not know that yet, which is your advantage, and it lasts exactly as long as you don't tell him." I told her about the party. The contracts, the deposits, my card, the vendor portal, the balance due Monday. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not obligated to pay for a party." And a little later, on my way out the door, "Take screenshots of everything before Saturday. Everything. Assume every account you have access to gets locked on Sunday." I want to be clear that the week that followed was ordinary. That's the part that still unsettles me. I confirmed the head count. I emailed Sumac and Salt about a gluten-free plate for Curtis's cousin. I sat on the bed and watched Curtis try on 3 shirts, and I told him the blue one, and he kissed me, and I kissed him back, because I am a person, and it was February, and he'd been my husband for 12 years, and my whole adult life was standing there in a blue shirt. I also opened a new checking account at a credit union on Bank Street and moved my own money, and photographed 900 pages of documents and gave a USB stick to Priya in the parking lot at the Loblaws on Isabella, and told her not to ask. She asked. I told her. She sat in my passenger seat with her hands flat on her thighs and said one word that I won't repeat. because Curtis's mother might one day read this. Saturday came in at -19, with a wind that made the wait for a cab feel like a punishment. The Rideau room looked exactly the way I'd imagined it in October when I first walked through with the events manager. White flowers, warm light, the long windows going navy as the evening came down. Rowan moving around the edges of the room with his camera. The DJ playing something old and easy while people ate. 80 people. Curtis's crews, his suppliers, the guys from hockey, my sister-in-law and her husband up from Cornwall, Priya and her wife, my Aunt Colette in the good green dress, and Harriet at table 1 with her cane hooked over the back of her chair, watching the room the way she must have watched 31 years of grade 5s. Curtis was luminous. That's the only word. He shook hands with both of his. He laughed with his whole chest. He stood with one foot slightly forward the way he does when he knows people are looking at him. He'd worn the blue shirt. And at 8:10, Yvette Sorensen came through the double doors in a champagne dress and shook the snow off her hair. I knew she'd come. I'd told myself I knew. But knowing a thing and watching it walk into a room you paid for are two very different experiences, and for about 4 seconds I had to hold on to the back of a chair. She introduced herself to the people near the door as a colleague of Curtis's, which is true in the sense that a lit fuse is technically a piece of string. Priya's hand found my wrist. "Tessa, I know, that's her, I know. Here is where it went wrong, and I've replayed it enough that I can give it to you almost frame by frame." At 8:45, I went up to Curtis, because Harriet had asked me 20 minutes earlier whether she was still doing the toast, and I'd said of course, and I'd told the DJ, and now the plates were cleared and it was time. Curtis was standing near the bar with 3 men from a lumber supplier, and Yvette was 2 feet away with a glass of wine, laughing at something with her head tipped. I touched his arm. I said, "Your mum's ready when you are. She's got her speech." He looked at me, and it was the strangest thing, because his face did something I'd never seen it do. It closed, like a hand. "Tess," he said, "not now. It's just the toast. Harriet's waiting." I said not now. He said it loud enough that the lumbermen found something interesting in their drinks. "Jesus, you've been on me all night. You're wound so tight you're killing the whole vibe." I remember thinking, in a completely detached way, vibe, 45 years old. I said quietly, "Curtis." And he said, "And I want to give you the words exactly, because he later spent a great deal of energy insisting he never said them. Go home, Tessa. Seriously, just go home." The room didn't go silent. That's a movie thing. What happened was that a pocket of it went silent, maybe 15 people, and the silence spread outward the way a crack goes across a windshield, and by the time it reached table 1, where Harriet was sitting with her hands folded in front of her, the DJ had heard it too and let the song thin out. I didn't move. I think I actually said, "You don't mean that." And Curtis put his hand on my elbow. Not hard, that's what people always want to know. And no, not hard, just certain. And he steered me a step toward the doors, and he said it a second time, louder, with a laugh in it, performing for the lumbermen. "Go home. You're embarrassing yourself." Yvette was looking at the floor. Rowan, God bless him, had his camera up and it was still going, and from table 1, very clearly, in the voice of a woman who has spent 3 decades making 11-year-olds sit down, Harriet Bellamy said, "Curtis Allen, take your hand off her." He let go like I was hot. I said, "Happy birthday," and I walked out of the room, not out of the building, into the coat room. I sat down on the little velvet bench between the racks, and I put my purse on my knees, and my hands were not shaking, and I have never in my life been so cold-bloodedly awake. He'd said it twice. I opened the vendor portal for the Crestmont first. As the contract holder, I could modify services up to 2 hours before delivery, and everything after 9 p.m. was still ahead of us. I cancelled the room extension. The Rideau room was booked through 1 a.m., and I brought it back to 10:30. I cancelled the late-night station. $600 of poutine and pierogies, gone with a checkbox. I cancelled the 8-room block. 2 guests had checked in already. The rest reverted to the hotel's rack rate, payable by whoever wanted them. I cancelled the suite on the top floor. I cancelled the brunch. Then I called Copperline. Because bar service doesn't have a portal, it has a manager named Dio who answers his phone, and I said, "This is Tessa. Contract holder for the Bellamy event. I'm revoking authorization on the open tab effective immediately. Please close it and run what's on it." Dio, to his eternal credit, said, "Understood. Cash bar from here. Cash bar from here." Then I emailed Sumac and Salt, final invoice. Do not process. My card is not authorized for the balance. Please invoice Curtis Bellamy directly at the following address. I attached his email. I attached the company's. Then the photographer, Rowan, had already shot 4 hours. 1,400 was covered. I emailed him. You're released as of 9:30. Files to me only, please, per contract. I'm the client. Then the DJ. 900 paid, contracted till midnight. I couldn't get a refund, but I could end the engagement, and I did. I texted him from the coat room, 20 feet from his booth. "Tessa here, wrapping at 9:30. Thanks, Merrick." Then I called the car service that was picking up the out-of-toners at 1 a.m., and I canceled that. The last thing I did was open my banking app and cancel the pre-authorization on my Visa for the venue's outstanding balance. The bar minimum, the service charge, the linens. 6,800 and something. The Crestmont would want that from someone by Monday. It would not be from me. Total time in that coat room, 19 minutes. I know because Priya texted me at 9:04 and I came out at 9:09. I did not sneak away. I have thought about whether I should have, and I'm glad I didn't. I walked back into the Rideau room and I stood near the doors and I watched. At 9:15, the servers stopped coming out. There'd been a dessert course, a lemon tart, individually plated, gorgeous, and it never came, because Sumac and Salt had received my email and their event lead, a very sharp woman named Odette, does not put out food she isn't getting paid for. At 9:20, a man from Curtis's hockey team went to the bar and came back looking confused and said, loudly, "They want a card?" At 9:25, the doors to the poutine station stayed closed, and a girl in a black apron unplugged the warming trays and carried them out through the service door. At 9:30, Merrick said, "All right, folks, that's it from me." And the music stopped, and the room's own noise came up like water. Rowan put the lens cap on his camera and gave me a look across 40 feet of parquet floor that I will treasure for the rest of my life. At 9:34, the events manager came in with a tablet and found Curtis and said something quiet, and Curtis said, "What?" at a volume that reached the back wall. And then he found me by the doors. I have never seen a man's face do so many things so fast. Confusion, calculation, and then a hot, scrambling fury, and he crossed the room and he said, "What did you do?" "I cancelled the payments," I said. "You, Tess, the brunch, my mother's staying at the—" "Your mother," I said, "can stay with me. Everyone's here. You told me to go home." I said it in a completely normal voice. So I stopped paying for a party I wasn't invited to. And here is where he made the mistake that finished him, and it is the mistake I've come to understand is the most common one men like Curtis make, and it's the reason people who heard about this later say good. He turned around, to the room, to 80 people, half of whom worked for him, and he said, "She's lying. I never told her to leave. She's had a hard year, everybody, she's not." And he did the thing with his hand near his temple, the little circling gesture, and he laughed, and he said, "She gets like this. 12 years, 11 days. And that gesture was worse than all of it. Harriet Bellamy stood up. She's 5'2". She had to put her hand on the table to do it, and she left her cane hooked on the chair. and the room went quieter than it had gone all night. "Curtis?" she said. "You told her to leave. You said it twice. I heard you from here. Everybody at this table heard you." She looked around, unhurried. "Ronald heard you. Deb heard you. Sit down and stop lying because you were never any good at it, not when you were 9 and not now." And then she looked past him at Yvette Sorensen, standing very still near the bar in her champagne dress. "And you," Harriet said, "get your coat." Nobody did anything for about 3 seconds. Then a chair scraped, and then another, and it turned out that 80 people can decide to leave a room very quickly when the food has stopped, and the bar wants cash, and the birthday boy's mother has just called him a liar in front of his suppliers. Priya drove me home. Aunt Colette sat in the back with her hand on my shoulder the whole way up Bronson and never said a word, which is the single kindest thing anyone did for me that year. Harriet slept in our spare room. At 7 the next morning, I found her in my kitchen with the coffee already on, and she was holding a mug in both hands, and she said, without looking up, "How long have you known?" I said, 11 days. She said, "How long has it been?" I said, "Since at least last May." And she nodded slowly, and she said, "Tell me the rest." And I sat down and I told her about the renovation fund and about YS Design Consulting and about her name on a guarantee at a bank on Rideau Street. And she listened to every word without interrupting, the way teachers do. And when I finished, she set the mug down and looked at the window for a while. Then she said, "I've been telling myself for 2 years that he was tired. Me too." Well, she stood up. She's 76. She said, "I need a lawyer, and I need my glasses, and I need you to send me those invoices." The rest is less dramatic, and it took a lot longer, and it's mostly paper. I served him on the Wednesday. Ilse had it ready before the party. I'd signed everything Thursday afternoon while Curtis was picking up his suit. He came home Sunday night to a house where I had already moved into the spare room and changed nothing else. Because in Ontario you don't leave the matrimonial home, and he stood in the doorway of the kitchen and cycled through, in order, rage, then a long, strange monologue about how nothing had happened with Yvette, then tears, then an offer to sell the truck. I let him talk for a while. Then I put a single sheet of paper on the counter, the summary page, the one where the 9 transfers were listed in a column with dates and amounts and the memo field ridge, ops repeating down the page like a stutter. He looked at it for a long time. He said, "That's my company's money." And I said, "Harriet owns 20% of your company, and she's read it too." The color went out of his face in a way I'd only ever read about. Harriet resigned as guarantor, or tried to. You can't just walk away from a personal guarantee. It turns out, so what she actually did was force a shareholder review and hire an accountant named Trevor Kwan and instruct him to reconstruct 14 months of subcontractor expenses. Trevor found everything I'd found and about $9,000 more that I'd missed, in the form of a truck lease that had never been a company truck. The CRA opened a review in the spring. That's a slow, patient, entirely unhurried machine. And I'll say only that, when a corporation has claimed $41,000 in deductions for consulting services that were never rendered, the outcome is not a stern letter. Bellamy Ridge Contracting Limited filed to wind up in October. 2 of Curtis's crew came to work for a competitor. One of them, a framer named Beau who'd been at the party, sent me a message that just said, "Heard. Thought you should know we all thought she was a colleague. Sorry." Yvette Sorensen deleted her professional profile in March. The $1,800 a month payments to the property management company in Hintonburg stopped in April, which I know because they showed up in his financial disclosure, and disclosure is a beautiful, brutal thing. The equalization ran through the summer. Ilse made an argument about depletion of net family property, and it was not a difficult argument to make, because there is very little a judge finds less sympathetic than a man who paid a woman's rent out of a home equity line of credit taken against a house he shared with his wife. We settled before it got that far, the way 95% of these things do on a Tuesday afternoon in a boardroom, with Curtis staring at the middle of the table. I kept the house for 8 months, and then I sold it, because it turned out I didn't want it. I bought a 2-bedroom on the 10th floor of a building near the canal, with a balcony the size of a card table, and in the winter I can see the skaters from my kitchen if I lean. Curtis moved back in with Harriet for a while. Then he didn't. I don't have the details, and I've stopped asking. And I want to say something honest here, because this is the part where people usually expect me to sound triumphant. I loved him. I am not going to pretend otherwise to make a better story. There were mornings that first spring when I woke up and reached over out of pure animal habit and found the cold half of a mattress, and I lay there and cried like a child. I missed the sound of his boots in the hall. I missed the way he narrated hockey games to nobody. What I did not miss, not for one single hour, was the version of me who spent 2 years telling herself that a tired man is entitled to a passcode. Priya asked me, about a year after, whether I regretted doing it at the party, whether it wouldn't have been kinder, that was her word, kinder, to have done it quietly, in a lawyer's office, with no 80 people and no lemon tart abandoned in a kitchen. And I said no. Not because I wanted revenge, although I'm not going to insult you by claiming I felt nothing when Marek's music stopped. I said no, because for 11 days I had carried the whole thing by myself, and if I'd done it quietly, I'd have carried it forever. Curtis would have told a story about a marriage that just ran out of road. He'd have told it well. He tells everything well. Instead, there were 80 witnesses to a man putting his hand on his wife's elbow and telling her to go home, and then telling a room she'd imagined it. 80 people who watched a 76-year-old woman stand up without her cane and refuse to let the lie stand. Some things need to be true out loud. I got the photographs from Rowan about 3 weeks later, 640 images, and I paid him the balance out of my own account without being asked. And I told him I was sorry his night ended that way, and he wrote back, "It ended fine. I've only looked at them once. There's one, near the end of the set, taken from across the room. Curtis has his mouth open, mid-word, one hand raised toward his temple. Harriet is standing at table 1 with her fingertips on the linen. Yvette is looking at her shoes. And I'm in the corner of the frame, half out of it, near the doors, with my purse over my shoulder and my coat already on. I look calm. That's what surprised me. I look like a woman who has finished reading a very long document and has found the row where the lie begins, and has closed the file and is going to go and get some air. It's February again. The canal is open, and there were kids out on it this afternoon with their sticks and a tennis ball, and I stood at the window for a while with my tea going cold, which is a habit I apparently can't shake. Harriet is coming for dinner on Sunday. She comes most Sundays. She still calls me dear, and she still tells me I don't put enough salt in anything. And neither of us has ever once suggested that our being family was contingent on her son. The lamp on the desk is the one from my father's house. I turned it off a minute ago. My phone is face down beside it, and nobody in the world needs anything from me until morning.